good, Josh?
Okay, how are you?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Better.
Good.
I was online last week and watched class, and I didn't watch it recorded. I watched it actually live, and I have to admit I enjoyed listening live, and I could identify people only because I know y'all. I mean, I could hear Kendall going, and y'all too, and Fred, and y'all were not here. Okay, okay, but so yeah, it's good to be back, and it's good to see people back, and of course I appreciate Josh teaching. Early on, he was giving himself a grade. Do you remember? And I'm texting Thea. I bumped your grade up. I think I was teasing and gave you a B plus.
Okay.
I would at the end. I would have sure given you an A without any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, it's good to be back. I would appreciate prayer still for me. Dennis has had pneumonia, and so we also need to pray for him. I'm not sure. I know we got some people out of town, so we kind of, everybody is now getting to be spring and got a lot going on, but let's just kind of pray for help for everybody. So Kendall, will you open us in prayer?
Sure. Dear Father in heaven, thank you so much for your love and your care, and over the centuries having your people to help us have a place to be. Thank you for your word. Thank you for Christ. Please be with all of us that have different health issues they're dealing with. Help Dennis get well, and be with Wendy as she continues her daily challenges, and with her brother who's facing the end of his life. Please be with those in all our families that need your help and your guidance and your strength. You're an awesome God, and we sure appreciate being in your family, and thank you for inviting us in, and thank you for being in ours. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. I have, for some reason last night was a night that I did not sleep well. So, I don't know, I woke up about 2:30 and was awake until about 5:30. And so in my, go figure, I kept chewing on this lesson quite a bit and thinking in my head, change the ending, not change the ending. So there's no telling where I'm going to go with this. And it's all going to reflect things that I kept thinking about. And actually this morning, literally right here, we got here a little earlier, and I was thinking about changing stuff on what I was looking at. So who knows what's gonna, I may say stuff that makes absolutely no sense because I didn't tie it into, it made sense at 2:30 this morning. It might not make sense now, so.
That's about the time I went to bed at 2:30.
You went to bed, okay. Okay, well, I'm glad you did. Yeah, we're in Genesis 35. We are still following Jacob and what's going on in his life. So, and then at one point, we're going to pop back and look at a little bit in chapter 34 because it's a major thing happens in 34 that kind of prompts why Jacob might be really scared in 35 that when he makes this journey, he runs a risk, and how I love the phrase, the terror of God fell on some of the people in this. And y'all, when it says in scripture a city, and some of these, like in Genesis 35, when we say city, we think Baltimore size. But in scripture, at least in this part now, Jerusalem, by the time we get to the New Testament, is certainly much bigger, not Baltimore size. And when we think about Babylon and some of that, it's bigger. But in some of these areas, when just keep that in your back of mind, these are not cities that are Babylon size. When we talk about the men of the surrounding area, but
a lot of them are like 2,000 people or 800 people or a 30,000 person city is a big city in that era.
And invariably, what would be around some of those things this Bible calls cities? Farms, but then
A wall.
a wall.
Oh.
And then often outside the wall was where you would find the farms and things like that. So knock down a wall, you've got a ready way in to conquer the city, or just starve them out. Some cultures were renowned. Hey, Wendy. For starving cities out, and especially if they didn't have a water supply. So let's look. So I pulled these pictures having to do with identification. Now, if you notice on the driver's license, her name is Cardholder, and she lives on Anytown, California. So I didn't lift somebody's, I just Googled driver's license images in Google Images.
Well, Alma looks real nice there.
I'm a card holder is her name. Identity, you know that. One of the things we worry about now is ID theft. Somebody steals your credit cards, you know. And one of the scams that it's circled around over the years, and I think Fred was reading in AARP, you know, this month was what are the scams for senior adults. And I think one of those said the same thing, is someone calls you and like they would say, is this Tracy? And the instinct is to say yes, which you shouldn't say yes, because for a scammer, you don't know what you're agreeing to with the yes.
I always ask, who is this?
And I ask, who's calling? Or what are you calling about? If you ever want to hear Fred sound completely like a non-Christian, he doesn't say anything non-Christian. But if it shows up as something on our phone and he doesn't recognize it, he's harsh sounding. Who's calling? So I was telling him, one time Kara's phone number came up from work and it came up as medical spam. And I saw I said, that's not medical spam, that's Kara calling from work. What are you doing? So I called her right back on her cell, but I said, anytime it comes up doesn't say the hospital name is the thing. It just said medical spam. You really speak to your identity. If we define identity as more than a name. What do you think? I don't think so. These are just names, and how easy it is. You could go change your name if you wanted to. Lord have mercy, make sure Social Security gets your new name, you know, or people go in witness protection, change a name. But I was watching something on witness protection, and people who go into it, if you normally shop buy clothes, I don't know, from Macy's, then you do not ever buy clothes from Macy's again. Because it's a pattern. I see you looking, Kate. It's a pattern of behavior.
So is somebody we recognize you going to the same store?
Well, if they're watching credit card charges. This woman always shop. Now, somebody's got to be determined to find you, but when you're in witness protection, they want you to be almost erased. Well, they do want you to be erased, and whoever's that knew you can't be anything like the old you.
It's really easy to identify people based on their behavior.
Easier than what we think.
Yeah, you can run an AI
Speak up
against
a little
your. If you go on the web and you have certain places you'd like to you get your news or whatever, and you spend a certain amount of time at each one, you can run an AI through the Google database and figure out who you are in a heartbeat. So when you go witness protection, you don't.
You can't even go to the
You have
same.
to change that. I don't know what they do. Maybe they give you a script. You know, go to CNN before you go to BBC or something.
From like credit card statements and stuff like that, you can usually geolocate where somebody has been.
Yeah.
So that you can get patterns from that.
Pattern of life.
So that kind of sort of proves the point of what I'm talking about. Those are all identity things, but the real identity of who we are is who we are. How do we behave? What do we believe? How do we act? And I'll give Fred a bye on sounding really, really harsh to people he does not know on the telephone. Kara was at the house and heard him answer the phone. This was last week. She said, "Daddy, quit sounding so mean on the phone," because he is not a mean person. But when we look at the identity of Jacob, or we look at the identity, you know, his name got changed to Israel. In this chapter of 35, God's going to reaffirm the name change. In biblical times, the name change was more than just words. My first name is Susan. I don't go by it. I go by my middle name. But everywhere I'm at a doctor or something legal, you know, they call you or they ask you, "What's your name?" Neither one speaks to my character. So I want us to be watching the character of this, because Jacob is going to make I don't necessarily like the word recommitment, but he's going to say his commitment to God again in this chapter. I've been talking about you. How you sound on the phone if you don't know somebody.
Don't want to talk to him.
Okay. The Bolt family questions. When the girls were in middle school and high school, if whatever they were going to do, even elementary school, we always had two questions we asked them. Who are you? And what does it mean? And whose are you? And what does that mean? So, who are you? We were wanting them to speak to their character and behavior. Behavior, good or bad, not always follows character. Sometimes somebody can have a bad behavior and their character is a good character. But then the second one, whose are you? We wanted that to reflect that they were a part of our family and our household, and we wanted also to them be reminded that they were God's, that they belonged to Him. Thea, did the questions ever cause you to think any, or it was just such an accepted part? This is what Mom and Daddy do.
It was just what we did.
It was just what we did.
But so, to some extent, if something becomes a part of your kind of internal mantra, you don't think about the underlying questions, because the underlying questions are baked into who you are already.
Yeah. So for y'all, still starting to raise, those are pretty good questions to ask them to examine. What does it mean if you say you are so and so? It's not going to identity, it's going to the heart of identity. Now, I got this map going up here to get a sense of where we're going. It's probably not going to show very well. A little bit later, there's going to be a map over here that's absolutely probably not legible at all, but then we're going to point up here because I wanted online people to at least have some kind of map. Okay, we're going to talk about Bethel. This, when we get in chapter 35, this is not the first time that Jacob has been to Bethel. So, and then to get a sense of where Bethel is, it's like right on the line between Samaria, and remember, in New Testament, Jews didn't want to go to Samaria, and then you can see Bethel is north of Jerusalem, middle area there, and then of course that makes both of them north of Bethlehem, which is the third arrow there. Now, we call Bethlehem the city of David. David has not even arrived on the scene at this point in Jewish history. I don't know quite what the number of years it's going to take from Jacob to Kathia. Could you look that up for me? How many years from Jacob to David?
480.
But see, they were
maybe,
they were in Egypt.
Maybe 600.
What, 400 years?
Yeah.
I don't know. Anybody before you've said 600 years.
Yeah, maybe 600.
Anybody else before she tells us want to take a guess at how many years from Jacob to David? Ah, come on, somebody be brave. Have the opportunity to be wrong.
I have that every day.
Yeah,
I do that enough.
you do that.
I don't need to volunteer.
I'm gonna guess.
Well, I got 600, or by going 400 in Egypt and 80 for Jacob's life, but I don't know if that's really how long he was. And then I just guessed
He was over 100.
another.
I'm gonna
120.
guess 1,000 years. How off am I?
I'm not.
She doesn't find anything that directly answers that. It's more complicated. There's
Then-
lots of like papers and then digging through things and adding things up and
Okay, well, she's
a
on
good
the
bit of
hunt.
time.
A good bit of time, okay. Because I want us to place this kind of where it is in when we look at the Old Testament, sometimes we lose the track of when something has happened. So my point in asking sort of the question was, how much time has elapsed before David does come on the scene? Then you look at the time that elapsed from David to Jesus' birth.
Okay, I found it.
Okay, here we go.
So, if we assume that, Jacob was 91 and Joseph was 30. Joseph was 30. He became governor of Egypt. And then you add the 430 years of the time. It was time of the Exodus from Egypt is 430 years after Abraham left Haran. And then
That's,
at least 1,000. I'm thinking doing very, very rough math, which we all know I don't do well.
So around at least 1,000 years.
Long time.
Long time, as Josh said, some time ago. And then you see in geography-wise, there's the Dead Sea. The river above that is, I believe, is the Jordan River. Or may have that wrong. Anyway.
yeah, right there where that word Jericho is.
There's the
that's
Jordan.
the Jordan River.
Okay. So now, I want us to look, Genesis, that's 35:1, I apologize. Look at the commands, the very first verse, chapter 35. God said to Jacob, we got some imperative commands, verbs there. He's not asking. My grandson would say, you is understood in this, so here we go. And he would know how to diagram that. So here we go. God said to Jacob, arise, go up to Bethel, and you see, sometimes up in the Bible has to do with up north in the map, and sometimes it has to do with, any guessers on that one? Altitude. Yeah. So you could actually, in some things, Mary and Joseph, I think, were headed south. but they went up in altitude to get to Nazareth. So arise, go up to Bethel, and dwell there. This is not going on a vacation, okay? You're going to go and you're going to stay. After you get there, make an altar there to, look at what God says to him. I love it. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. Okay, Jacob. Just to remind you a little bit how you got to Bethel the first time. Remember when you tricked your brother? You went there. You're going to go back for another visit. Now, Jacob doesn't know what God's going to say to him at Bethel. And when we get further in the chapter and we get to hear what God says to him, it is such a precious thing. He is not taking him to Bethel to verbally beat him up again. He's taking him to Bethel. He's going to bless him again. So, let's see what Jacob's response is. Bless his heart, he hopped on this. So God said to his household, but this is interesting too. I want you to listen to this, and to all who were with them. Because our question is going to be, why are they there? Put away the foreign gods that are among you, and purify yourselves and change your garments. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, so that I may make there an altar to the God who answers me in the day of my distress, and who has been with me wherever I go. I looked at the word foreign God. It pretty consistently, where I found it, means strange gods. This is not the God of Abraham. These are strange gods. In Canaan society, that's where they'd been a lot of multiple gods with the little g. Now, and then where in the world did they get those gods? Do you remember Rachel brought them with her when she left her brother Laban? Now, I can't figure out why they had been allowed to stay all this time.
Was Laban her brother or her father?
Her uncle. Wait, what was like?
Laban was Rachel's father.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay,
Because he was Uncle Laban to Jacob.
he was okay. These family relations.
But one of the things that strikes me about that story about how Rachel took the gods, and here he's saying put around the gods, is this family worshipped other gods. They didn't just worship Yahweh.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, earlier in the story, as we pointed out, Jacob was like, well, my father's God, not his God. And so this event, he decided to go with him. So, a lot of times with a little bit of distance and elementary Sunday school stories in the middle, we think of from Abraham onward, they were just all, or from Noah onward, there was this whole lineage of people who were faithful to the God. And they're not.
And they're not.
Worshiping other gods too,
And our culture too is a lot of the religions that are around here are monotheistic. And so we were raised in an environment where that, thinking of polytheism is kind of unheard of. It's a weird, far off,
We call it
quote, unquote,
paganism.
Indian thing
Or
or
Indian
something
thing.
like that.
Yeah,
where you
where they
think of
have
what they do
hundreds
over
of
there.
gods.
Right. So that's, but to them growing up, so now place yourself in that, I guess, the Hinduist environment, or where there's multiple gods. I can't. But if you were raised polytheistic, then somebody else coming in and saying, "Oh, yep, here's another god," you just go, "Yep, okay." I know, because I don't remember who it was, but I remember hearing somebody say that one of the hardest things to do is to witness to polytheists, because they're more than happy to accept your God.
To add one more to the.
Yep, it's no big deal. But in our culture, we have the opposite problem, where there are people that deny theism, and so we have the other side of it. So it's
And even Paul, when he got to Athens, he said, I see all these statues to all these gods floating around here. I'm going to tell you about the statue to the unknown God. Well, you know why they had a statue to the unknown God? They wanted to make sure they didn't offend any God that they didn't know about.
Yeah, it's like a good luck charm.
Uh,
Okay, I'm
yeah,
going
rabbits.
fishing, I better give something to the fish god. Okay, I'm going sailing, I better give something to the sailing god.
Hedging
I'm gonna
bets.
plant crops, I better give something to the farmer god. I'd like to have a family, I better give somebody to the fertility god. You know?
Yeah, it's cover all your bases. Years ago, Fred had an experience. We did. We lived in another town. A child was hurt. The mother asked Fred to come to the hospital and pray. We thought, oh, we're making inroads with this family. We get to the hospital and pray, and there is how many different? There were,
Muslim, she'd already had the Roman Catholic chaplain in.
and there was a spiritualist
Yeah.
who
She was
was-
more Native American.
and she was more, that's right, she was more Native American. She was going to cover all the bases. So when God commands him to do this thing, do you notice? God doesn't say get rid of the foreign gods in this command. Get up, go, dwell, make an altar. In that sentence, there is not, and get rid of the foreign gods. So before we get so focused, I wanted to make the point that they live in a culture where there's multiple gods. And Jacob is taking that command one step further. So he's to be, I don't know if commended is the right word. Do you know what I'm trying to say? He is understanding, I believe, God's call, one God, Yahweh, called to him in his life. So put away the foreign gods. That'd be like telling people get rid of all your Taylor Swift albums. You know, I'm not saying, my point, no, Taylor Swift, I'm being sarcastic. You know, from the standpoint of some people would be so wrapped up in Taylor Swift and all the albums that it would be a challenge for them, for whatever reasons, to get rid of them.
So long as I don't have to put aside my Jedi lightsaber.
You know, the point is being so attached, Thea, to something that is integral to what you believe. That would be a hard thing to do.
Okay.
She's not agreeing with me, but
No,
that,
it's not that I'm not agreeing with you. I don't think as a culture we have a conception of what it meant to have personal and family gods, and so I don't think it's an apples to apples comparison with a pop star. And that's where I think, and so I think we do a disservice to the understanding of that the Canaanite people and the people of that time of having personal family gods, even the Romans and the Greeks, when we try to say, well, we put money as a god, and like, I think that's maybe closer, but I don't think we really understand how every moment of their life was built around making sure they hadn't ticked off the family
That's
god.
true.
And I don't think we understand that. But it also goes into they lived their life on a day-to-day basis because life was so fragile.
true. You make some good points for that. Because it's not the life, shush your mouth over there. Y'all didn't hear that little aside that she made. Her husband did. So, but
She didn't say anything that was wrong.
she. So when we talk about, I put the note on Jacob's family that he addressed this to. Conceptually, it was not the nuclear family that was just, mom and daddy. Well, at this point, 11 kids. It was servants, and it was slaves, and it was much more extended. So when he is saying to all this, I don't know how many people this would be, but he's saying to all of these people, get rid of the foreign gods. This is who we identify with.
He
Now-
says put them away. He didn't say get rid of them. He said
Well,
put them away. So you put them in a
That's
box.
interesting. That is interesting. Okay.
He's not telling them to throw them out. He's just put them in a box so they won't be watching. So we can go do that.
Don't bring them on this trip.
Yeah.
Okay. Huh. So, cleanse yourself, purify, and change your garments. In Old Testament and even New Testament, a sign of mourning. What did, and especially Old Testament with the prophets, what did they put on as a sign of mourning?
Sackcloth.
Sackcloth, ashes. They would tear their garments. This is purify and change your garments. Prepare for worship. And then he says, in case you don't understand why I want you to make this, he says, I'm going to build an altar to the God who answers me in the day of my distress and has been with me wherever I have gone, whether or not I was doing the right thing along the way. God's faithfulness did depart from him, although there were certainly times when we looked at his character, and his character was, remember, trickery, deceit, but we're not going to condemn Jacob to the nth degree because, and we know the why. Okay, now, I forgot this point, Kendall. So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods they had and the rings in their ears, and Jacob buried them under the oak at Shechem. Then they set out. So I don't know if they went back and retrieved them at any point. And one of the things said earrings, was it because it was too much adornment? Earrings could be pagan. There could be, like if the earrings are gold, there could be pagan symbols hammered into the earrings. So earrings were significant that if you're getting rid of one kind of god, you got to get rid of the earrings along with it. So they set out, and the terror of God fell on the towns all around them, so that no one pursued them. Okay? Now, the terror of God kept people from the other people in the other towns chasing them. So the question I had was, why might some want to destroy them, and why was Jacob concerned? Now, I don't have a link in there, but Genesis 34. This story, I'm going to not read every bit of it, but I want to go back and pick up some of the verses so you can understand why they might be concerned and why God's terror needed to fall on these people. Okay, now, here's verse 1 of 34. And I'm going to read about 5 verses here. Now, Dinah, the daughter of Leah, and we know who Leah was, who had born to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. When Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, the ruler of the area, saw her, and he took her and violated her. So Dinah gets raped by the leader of that little area. I don't want to call him a warlord, that's not accurate, but an area that he controlled. So he rapes her. And then he goes to his father and says, you know, I kind of really like her. Get her for me as my wife. So now, Jacob heard about this. I'm down to verse 5, that his daughter Dinah had been defiled. His sons were in the field with his livestock, so they kept quiet about it until they came home. Dinah has lost her marriage worth, assuming that other man wanted her. You know, she is no longer worthy of marriage because she's no longer pure, even though it wasn't her fault. Okay. So now, when then Shechem's father Hamor went out to talk with Jacob. Jacob's sons had come in from the field as soon as they heard what had happened. They were filled with grief and fury because Shechem had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing that should not be done. I don't know if that's strictly disgrace to their house. I don't think it was quite as much disgrace to the individual person. Okay, so it goes down to verse 9. He's saying, come on, let me have you for your son. This part I thought interesting. intermarry with us. Give us your daughters and take our daughters for yourselves. You can settle among us the land that is open to you. Live in it, trade in it, and acquire property in it. What can happen when they intermarry? And this happened later in the New Testament, Old Testament with the prophets. If God's people in the Old Testament intermarried, what a lot of the times happened to the faith of the Old Testament? I'm talking about Jeremiah and
They end up with a blended faith. They accept the gods of the people they marry into.
they accept the gods. Remember, I don't remember which king it was. Israelite, Northern Kingdom king probably. He had built altars on the hills for the pagan gods that his wives and the
Solomon did the same thing.
Solomon did the same thing. He married for all these political alliances, and these women brought their gods with them. Okay, now, and he says, the Shechem, the father, says, make the price for the bride and the gift I'm bring as great as you like, and I'll pay whatever you ask me. Shechem is, only give me the girl as my wife. Now that's an interesting, whatever money you want for, let's make that property exchange. Okay. Now, listen to what the brothers said. Because their sister Dinah had been defiled, Jacob's sons replied deceitfully as they spoke to Shechem and his father Hamor. They said to them, we can't do such a thing. We can't give our sister to a man who is not circumcised. That would be a disgrace to us, because, Abraham required his, Moses, let me get the right person. Moses required, when he was out in the desert, for he and the household out there to be circumcised, sign of the covenant. I'm drawing a blank. Did God tell Abraham that practice to be circumcised in his household? I don't
remember.
I don't remember either. I don't remember. So anyway, that's going to be the condition. All your men have to be circumcised, okay? And then we'll settle among you. We'll take your daughters and marry them and all that. So sound like a good deal? So Hamor and Shechem went to talk to the men at the city gate, their neighbors, about this. They had to agree. He said, okay, this isn't a bad deal. Let's go ahead and do that.
We know Hamor and Shechem. Shechem was the bad son who did what he wasn't supposed to do.
Yeah.
And now they're trying to make it right. So what that's got to mean is Jacob and his family and all of his people.
Wait. Careful.
Were scary.
Oh, yeah.
They were afraid of him because they wouldn't, if you got a whole city full of men and say, hey, my son wants to marry this one, so let's all get circumcised. Nobody's going to go, yay, that's a great idea.
Well, they in essence.
It was part of the Abrahamic covenant.
Okay.
It was, I was just going back to see where it was. Kids
Yeah.
8 days old.
So that discussion with the men at the gates must have been like, these people are going to kill us if we don't do this.
So the bad people, the point you're making is they were scared of what Jacob and his people would do.
Yeah, they weren't just, this is reading between the lines, but they couldn't have just been wanting to pay the Dinah's bride price. It's got to been more like, there's this army sitting right outside our gates, and our scion offended them all, so we got to do this.
Let's see, okay? So all the men who went out of the city gate agreed with Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male in the city was circumcised. Just think about that. If you're not familiar with this story, especially think about it in light of this next verse. 3 days later, while all of them were still in pain, so this was done without benefit of anesthesia unless you got drunk ahead of time. So 2 of Jacob's sons Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their sword and attacked the unsuspecting city, and think small area, and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. Okay, so the sons of Jacob came upon the dead bodies located at the city where their sister had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and donkeys and anything else. They carried off all their wealth and all their women and children, taking as plunder everything in the house. Now, Jacob's opinion on this: you have brought trouble on me, but now think why he might be scared to go on this journey. You've brought trouble on me by making me a stench to the Canaanites and Perizzites, the people living in this land. Now, we are few in number. They may join forces against me and attack me. I and my household will be destroyed. Well, the brothers replied, well, should our sister have been a prostitute? So here is Jacob getting ready to go on this journey, and he sure may want the terror of God to fall on these other people, to protect them. You know, the time a group is most vulnerable, especially when it's family groupings moving, is when they're on the move. So you can see why the terror of God was vital to Jacob. God knew, you know, somebody said, don't ever be surprised by what God does. So God prepared a way to keep them safe because he had commanded them to go. He commanded Jacob, you're going to Bethel. So Jacob and all the people with him came to Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan. There he built an altar, and he called the place El Bethel, because it was there that God revealed himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother. Well, somebody, you got Genesis, Josh, you got Genesis 27, 42 through 45. If you would read, and this is what he's reading is happened 20 years earlier than this.
42, 45. But the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, behold, your brother Esau comforts himself about you by planning to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice, arise, flee to Laban, my brother in Haran, and stay with him a while until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and bring you from there. Why should I be bereft of you both in one day?
So he's fled to Bethel before. Now, I think it's interesting that his mama said there might come a time when your brother's not going to be furious with you and want to kill you. But God revealed, now I didn't go any further from that. We've looked at that in the past. But how God revealed himself to Jacob at that point. But there he built an altar. And I'm going to stand up. There, if you people who are looking at it visually, I'm sorry, online can't see this.
Watch the cord, Tracy.
Huh? Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that, Wendy, so I don't trip. Okay. So let me get, Jacob builds an altar upon his return. So here actually is Bethel. Now, he's already going to be named Israel, but it's going to be repeated again right there. So he makes, these are arrows going down. These are arrows. There's an old Southern phrase, somebody's stomping grounds. Heard that? This is a multiple trip back and forth for Jacob. So at some point, and it's got, remember when Jacob and Esau were reunited? That happens right over here. So I don't know the scale of, well, there's scale of miles down there. This whole thing from here to here is 50 miles. So when we're looking at where they were united right here, down to Bethel, that doesn't look like it's much of toward 50 miles. It's not these huge distances. So next time you come in,
But there's mountains.
well, good point. There are mountains to go over. Recalculating, those 50 miles might have been worse than what we would have thought. So I'm back 20 years later, and I'm here. I'm not here because Mama said to flee and run away. I am here because I am here because I'm being obedient to God. Boy, what a difference. 20 years ago, I'm hightailing it, to use another Southern expression, out of town because my brother's going to murder me. Now I'm back because I have grown and I'm obedient to the Father. And remember, this is so. I do remember God reminded me that's where I went when I was fleeing from my brother out of the sin that I had done. Now I'm going back because I'm being obedient. So look at the growth in Jacob's life. You know, it's what would be if we looked at our life in a 20-year span, what growth can we see within 20 years? I'm not sure why God had this put in. A little side note there, but now Deborah, Rebecca's nurse, died. Now, who is Jacob's mama?
Rachel.
Huh?
Rachel or Leah?
Well, no, Jacob is the one who had the 12
Yeah.
sons.
Jacob and Esau were twins, and
Yep.
wasn't their mother Rachel?
Rachel? Okay, now
Isaac's wife.
Isaac's wife was Rebecca. Okay.
No.
These all, wait. Deborah. Who's Rebecca?
Oh, okay.
That's one of Jacob's wives. Because it was Rebecca and Leah, right?
No, it's Rachel and Leah.
Okay, now I'm getting messed up.
See, I'm getting messed up too. Look it up. How did we ever teach before online resources? It sure makes us more careful what we say because we can check it.
Okay, Rebecca was Isaac's wife.
Okay, but who?
And so Rebecca was Jacob's mother.
Okay.
So Deborah was his mother's nurse, was probably his wet nurse, was like his extra mom.
This woman had been with Jacob, I'm assuming, since he was a baby. So it says, so it was named Alan Bacuth, Ope of Weeping for Jacob. I think we've got all these names of who is whose mama and who is whose nurse on that one. Now, God goes back right here and reviews the name change again. Now, after Jacob returned from Paddan Aram, which is northern Mesopotamia up there, God appeared to him again and blessed him. God said to him, "Your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel." God had, and that on the yellow side, that thicker paragraph down there. Okay, this is from chapter 32. Then the man said to Jacob, because this is the one wrestled with, remember? Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you've struggled with gods and with humans and have overcome."
Now, is this a retelling of the previous story, or did Jacob go through Bethel, back all the way up to Paddan Aram, and then come back again?
I think it is because it says God appeared to him again. And if I take that just as it's written, then this is the second time that he is reminded that his identity has been changed, not just his name. Now here comes the promise. I titled this, and this next one was where I had problems with how I titled it. God renews His promise. When somebody renews their wedding vows, why did they do that? Like when you get to your, I don't know, your 40th or your 50th, they have a renewal ceremony. Do you agree with the thought behind renewing of wedding vows?
I guess so. I mean, if it's something, I guess if it's something that you would want to do, publicly say, yes, I know I would do it all again. I mean, who knows, maybe your daddy was standing there with a shotgun the first time. You didn't have much.
That's true. Now you're,
Maybe I really mean it this time.
I've been with this woman for 40 years. Now I truly mean the vow that I'm taking. Now I hadn't looked at it like that. I had looked at it from, if you've run the race for 40 years, if you've been married 50 years, then why do you need to renew the vow, since I hope you've kept the vow all those years? But that's just how I'm looking at it.
That's a recommitment. I mean, that you would still do the same.
Yeah, I had looked at it like you would marry the person all over again.
It's a commitment of love.
I always, I often ask Julie to marry me.
Again?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so
Well, I
far,
asked her 10 times this week.
were you a problem this week?
No, it's just an expression of love.
Okay.
And anytime somebody renews their marriage vows, my first thought is, well, there was some big problem in their life and they're rededicating to each other. But I'm sure there are plenty of people who just want to celebrate again.
Right.
Just want to celebrate their.
So honey,
Marriage.
She has said no these 10 times.
She occasionally she says no, but almost always she says yes.
so Julie's gonna, honey, in 3 years' time, are we gonna have a recommitment ceremony?
Doesn't matter, that's up to you.
It
Doesn't
really
matter,
had
it's
no
up to me.
feel to me, but I like to ask.
The title that was the word that was bothering me in the title for this slide, anybody want to, well, there's only 4 words. Is there a word that kept niggling me that I didn't choose a good one? For me, it was renews. Because God doesn't, and I may have been overthinking that early God doesn't renew His promise. In the sense that
It's still there. It
His
doesn't need
promise
to
is-
be renewed.
it doesn't, because when we renew something, in essence, you renew a magazine subscription. You were saying, okay, I want to buy this again.
How about remind?
I think remind is a better statement there than renews, because God's promise is steady, and God had been making that promise all along. Perhaps Jacob needs to be reminded again of what, obviously Abraham needed to be reminded. God reminded him. God reminded Isaac. God reminded Jacob. There's this joke that I don't care for all these things it says about. It's not ugly or anything. The husband said, well, I told you I loved you on the day we got married. It's now 30 years later. I hadn't changed my mind. Why do I need to tell you again? God restates His promise, and look what He says. And God says to him, I am God Almighty. Actual Hebrew word used there is El Shaddai. It means God's power and all sufficiency. I am all you need. I am all powerful. Be fruitful and increase in number. I'm going to ask you, does that ring a bell? A nation and a community of nations will come from you. Kings will be among your descendants. The land I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I also give to you. And I will give this land to your descendants after you. Then God went up from him at the place where he had talked with them. When else was the command of being fruitful and multiplying have been given within the book of Genesis 2 different times?
Adam was one.
Adam was one. There was one more. The world had a really small population at that point. Well, Adam and Eve, that when Noah came off the ark, the command was be fruitful and multiply. A nation that's very small. We think of nations as, I could show you a map or a globe and we think, well, there's Finland and there's Spain and there's whatever. A nation, probably a better word, nation, for a group of people who have a common purpose and a common goal. Now, later on, we're going to get Israel, Northern Kingdom and Southern Kingdom. That's whether 1,000 years later, we're not sure how many years that happened. You're going to get more of nations, but a community of nations, and kings will be among your descendants. Can you think of a king that came out of the promise of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? There's kind of two. One with David. Who else is a descendant after that line of David? Jesus. Yeah. So, I promised Isaac and Abraham and Isaac, I have not forgotten you and your people. There's nowhere that God says to them as they move along, I'm going to forget you, but I know you're human. I'm going to tell you again. So Jacob set up a stone pillar at the place where God had talked with him, and he poured out a drink offering on it. He also poured oil out on it. Jacob called the place where God had talked with him Bethel. And it does, Kendall, you brought up the point, it did sound like a restatement, because he'd already named it Bethel. The only reason I think it wasn't was because of that word in there again. Stone pillars were not quite as common sometimes as altar, as an earthen mound could also be used for an altar. But God, you've promised I worship you. I set up this altar, and all the way back, arise, go, dwell, and make an altar there. There is nothing in there that God says, by the way, I want you to listen when you get there, because I'm going to renew the promise. Whatever was in his heart, the outpouring of that was worship. He couldn't do anything but worship. And I wonder how much he remembered in all those 20 years. He said because God was with him wherever he went. You know, the multiple wives and trying to get the one he wanted, and his encounter with Esau, and he was scared Esau was going to kill him. So, how do we go about reviewing our commitment to God? Every year at our little church growing up, there'd be a revival, the Deep South Church, and a preacher would come in and preach, and you know, it was sort of like this. There were a few non-believers who'd be saved, but then there was always the same group of church members who would go forth and kind of recommit, and you always hope you get some of those backsliders. I seem to be filled with Southern terms today, but some of those backsliders to come to church and repent. So how do we think about our commitment? Renewing on a daily basis? Sometimes, Kendall, not picking on you at all, but depending on the kind of week you may have had, you may need almost a recommitment, and that God, you are with me today. I know you're going to see me through all this junk that's going on at work.
I find it, at least in my life, it's more of a daily or every couple of days kind of thing, and family prayers at night and things like that. That's where I feel like I'm renewing my commitment and our family's commitment to God, as opposed to it being a big event. You know, okay, these last 5 years have been not paying attention, and here's a new one, you know, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But for me, that's how I experience it. But I know a lot of other people experience it in terms of less interested in things about God, and then after a time in their life without paying attention to God, they want to come back.
And commit.
I think that happened to me earlier in my life. Julie and I come from different religious traditions, and we had a hard time finding a place to attend church. And at one point we just got tired and we stopped. And then there was a moment where I said, well, if I don't get this train started, it's never going to happen. And so the first wave, the 2 girls and I started going to church. And
Okay.
eventually Julie joined us, and that was probably closest to that kind of a renewed commitment. You know, and that wrapped up in some other things in my life about, you know, questioning the existence of God and things like that. So I guess now that I've talked my way through it, yeah, there was one particular moment in my life where it was a pretty strong recommitment to God, and an intentional recommitment to God.
Wasn't an accident.
It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a daily renewal. It was we kind of faded out and we came
Recommitted.
back in.
Okay. Just something to, it's time to go. I hope to leave that with that thought with you. Where do we go on a daily basis? My goodness, sometimes it might be an hourly basis to say, I'm going to be committed to you, whatever happens. Okay, let's close in prayer. Father, I just thank you for your word. I thank you that you used flawed people to accomplish your will on this earth. Father, I thank you for your patience with them and your desire to bring your children along to where the spiritual maturity and the example that you wanted them to set. Father, walk with us throughout this week, that we're going to be living out the example that you want us to set. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Let me turn off over here.